Since type 1 and type 2 errors can be a little bit confusing, let's take a little bit deeper look here. Type 1 error is when you reject. However, the null was in fact right. So you rejected the null, but the null was correct. So you made a mistake. That is called a type 1 error. In court, since the null hypothesis is that everyone is innocent, it would be rejecting innocence, calling someone guilty when in fact they really were innocent. So it would be convicting an innocent person. That's a type 1 error. The probability is actually linked to alpha, so when alpha is 0.05, it means you have a 5% chance of making a type 1 error. When alpha is 0.01, you reduce that to a 1% chance, so lowering your alpha reduces your chances of a type 1 error. Type 2 error, on the other hand, is when you fail to reject. However, the null was in fact not true. Now, we don't know for sure, but the O.J. Simpson trials from a number of years ago is an example of a case where pretty much everyone was convinced that he was guilty. However, the jury failed to reject due to some various issues. They do have a name for the probability of this. It's called beta, but the big thing to remember is when you fail to reject, and it was the wrong thing to do because the null was wrong, you made a type 2 error. Another way of thinking about it is false positives and false negatives. If you're looking at medicine, you might hear it called a false positive, false negative. This guy here is being told by his doctor that he is pregnant. Now, if the null hypothesis is that you're not pregnant, he rejected the null. He said, no, you actually are pregnant. And you can tell by his face here that he thinks the doctor might be making an error. On the other side here, if the null is that you are not pregnant, this doctor doesn't seem to have enough evidence to be convinced that she is pregnant. Now, I am guessing that's just a basketball in her shirt or something. She seems a bit concerned. She thinks that the doctor made an error in not rejecting. Another way to look at it is a decision tree. So if in reality the null is true, and we say that we fail to reject the null, that's good. We shouldn't reject something that is true, so we did the right thing. However, when in reality the null is true and we reject it, then we made a type 1 error. On the other hand, if the null is false, which means we believe the alternative is true, if the null is false and we fail to reject, that is a type 2 error. It means we did the wrong thing, we failed to reject, therefore type 2 error. If the null is false and we reject that false thing, then again we did the right thing. Last way is through a grid. If in reality the null is true and we accept it, which means we fail to reject, I should actually even change that wording there, that is a good thing. If the null is true and we reject it, then we made a type 1 error. Alternative is true and we reject it, reject the null, that's a good thing. If the alternative is true and we fail to reject the null, well, then we made a type 2 error. So let's do one quick example with that. I did a study at the significance level alpha is 0.05. My p-value is 0.06. So 0.06 is greater than 0.05. You would fail to reject. So I did not reject my null hypothesis. However, I later found out that the null hypothesis was incorrect. Did I make an error? Yeah, I rejected something, but there really was not a correct null hypothesis. So I would say that the null was not true, the alternative was true. I failed to reject, I made a type 2 error. Last situation here, we have the null hypothesis is that the patient is healthy. So by default, you come in, we assume that you're healthy. If we find some evidence, the alternative is that the patient has a disease. A type 1 error, which is rejecting when the null is true, is that we would tell the patient that they have a disease, even though they're actually healthy. So we would reject health when they're actually, in fact, healthy. Type 2 error is the other direction. We take a patient who has the disease, and instead of rejecting health, we say, oh yeah, no, we haven't found any evidence that you have a disease, you may go, you are healthy. That would be a false negative. In this particular situation, the one that I think would be worse would be the one that when you tell a diseased patient that they're healthy. Because now they're going to walk around, think life's all great, and then keel over one day, and that's the end. If you tell a healthy patient that they have a disease, they're probably going to have to go in for more testing, and eventually they're going to figure out, oh, actually you're healthy. No big deal. So this one might make someone a little bit nervous. This one here could potentially end someone's life. So again, looking at it from the tree perspective, if they are healthy and you tell them they're healthy, wonderful. If they have a disease and you tell them they have a disease, that's not a happy thing, but at least you can get them started on treatment. Otherwise, you end up with the type 1 or type 2 errors.